course, I'm joined now on a panel. Rick Santelli, Amy Walter, John Stanton, Kasim Reed. We've got new polling this morning. We went in the field the last couple of days on law enforcement issues, and not surprisingly, a big divide between blacks and whites. We asked, do you agree or disagree with this? Are there different standards in the law enforcement community that they apply to blacks and whites? Whites, a majority disagree that there are different standards, 51%. African Americans, 82% agree that there are different standards applied. How about confidence that the police, the law enforcement community will treat races equally? 52% of whites have a great deal of confidence. 43% of African Americans have very little confidence. And of course, confidence in the legal system after Ferguson, after Staten Island, has it increased or decreased? In this case, both whites and blacks say their confidence in the legal system has decreased. Whites, 35% say it's just decreased, with blacks, 70%. Mayor Reed, the Atlanta Police Department, do you feel as if they treat blacks and whites the same or differently in your city?
You know, I think you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. I think we do a better job than most. If you look at the racial composition of our police department, it looks like the communities that we serve. If you look at the movement towards cameras and videos, we were already discussing that before the Ferguson judgment. And I think that because of the history of the city of Atlanta, candidly, we work harder at issues of race than other communities do. This is a part of the DNA of our city, being the home of Dr. Martin Luther King. But what I made clear is that Ferguson can happen anywhere because it's about the judgment of an individual officer. And what we have to do is we have these conversations and move conversations to real reform is to make sure that we don't take a broad brush and paint police officers as bad people because they do a tough job. But when we see wrong, we need to act decisively, Chuck. And in order to make there be real value from the losses we've seen, we have to move forward on training, caring about the equity in terms of the racial composition of the police force, and the conversation around video cameras is over. We're going to move there.
They're clearly. You know, Rick Santelli, this is a trust in government issue. I mean, I sit there and say that we sit here and talk about trust in government, and we were so focused on, you know, agencies and competency, and maybe it's healthcare, maybe it's this. Here's another part of Americans' population, African Americans, who have a trust in government issue. In this case, it's law enforcement.
Believe me, when you're talking about trust in government, you're preaching to the choir. Whether it's on the financial side, the central banking side, we see areas where the government does good jobs. We see areas where they don't do as good a job. I think the mayor nailed it. I don't understand and haven't understood in this world of technology where every building has a camera, every ATM has a camera. Why don't we have cameras on police officers? And it's really sad that this horrible tragedy had to bring that about. But there's also a huge responsibility for us in the media, leaders like Reverend Al Sharpton, to make sure that this story doesn't end up like University of Virginia, Rolling Stone. We have to make sure we do it right. A huge responsibility, because these cases might represent a small percentage of all the issues, and police, for the most part, as the mayor pointed out, do a good job. But that doesn't mean that we can't do better. And I think this is the time to begin this discussion.
You know, John Stanton, Amy Walter, you guys are both here in D.C. You've been residents with me here a while. You know, both Rick's a Chicago guy, Kasim's an Atlanta guy. We've seen Washington go through this transition. I mean, I'd say 20 years ago, we had a big trust problem between the populace and law enforcement, and it's been slowly restored. What's worked, do you think, in Washington?
I think that the police in D.C. have learned that they have to try to avoid what is, I think, a cultural problem, frankly, in our country, which is that people look at young black men as threats automatically. It is just sort of how they've become defined.
Guilty until proven innocent.
Guilty until proven innocent. And when you add that into the justice system, that creates, you know, a volatile mix. And I think that the police in D.C. have tried harder than in a lot of other places to not do that, but you still see it here. It's not quite as pronounced. We haven't had something like Mr. Gardner or anything like that happen here of late, but you do see it still happening here. You know, young black men are constantly being pulled over. They're being stopped on walking down the street. I see it in my neighborhood all the time, and it's something that, you know, has sort of fallen down a little bit, but it's still there.
Yeah, that's sort of the piece of this is that, and I think the mayor addressed this, which is there's a powder keg that's sitting there, and it just takes one spark to light it, And so when you have this deep-seated...
It goes back generations.
That's right. This polling is not new.
That's not new.
If we asked this before, and I've seen polling, asked in 2009, same numbers. This is still sitting there. It's not going away. It was the same number we saw after the riots and Rodney King.
Well, I guess the question now is, what do you do? What are some reform measures? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in a minute. A discussion of the future of policing in America. What needs to be done to restore this trust gap between African Americans and law enforcement.